August 19, 1944. 03 to 30 hours. Northern France. The low hum of a farm tractor cuts through the pre-dawn silence, its engine sputtering as it begins its climb up a rutted hill. But this isn't just any farmer. The man at the controls isn't planting crops. He's preparing to take on an entire army. You might expect a battle to be fought by soldiers, tanks, or warplanes, but this one will be fought by a small band of underdogs. A Texas farmer and his ragtag crew of 4 men, armed with little more than homemade ingenuity and a deep resolve. In the throes of World War II, the Allied forces were locked in an uphill struggle, and the Germans had one of the most formidable armored forces the world had ever seen. Tanks like the Panzer IV and Tiger I rumbled across the battlefields, crushing everything in their path. Yet it was in the thick of this conflict, on a forgotten stretch of land in northern France, that a group of men with no formal military training would alter the course of history. Over the next 81 days, these men would destroy 258 German tanks. Lafayette Poole was born on April 23, 1919, in Canton, Texas. Poole grew up in a rural area and, like many of his peers, was familiar with the hard work of farm life. After finishing high school, he worked as a mechanic and farmer before being drafted into the U.S. Army in 1942, during the height of World War II. Poole's mechanical background would later prove invaluable, as he quickly became skilled in operating and maintaining tanks. In 1943, after completing his training at the Armored Force Training Center at Fort Knox, Kentucky, Poole was assigned to the 3rd Armored Division, also known as the Spearhead Division, which was a key component of the U.S. Army's armored forces. The division was known for its fast-moving tank units that could punch through enemy lines, and it would be here that Poole's name would become synonymous with courage, skill, and strategic brilliance. In 1944, after the D-Day invasion, the 3rd Armored Division was sent to Normandy, France, where the Allies were attempting to push the Germans back and liberate Western Europe. By this time, the war had reached a critical point, with the Germans on the defensive but still possessing formidable strength, especially in their armored divisions. Lafayette Poole, serving as a tank commander in the Sherman M4A3, was about to face the ultimate test. Despite being one of the more modestly trained tank commanders in terms of experience compared to some of his counterparts, Poole's background in mechanics and his calm under pressure proved to be a winning combination. His crew, although small, was dedicated, and Poole's leadership would soon lead them to one of the most remarkable tank kill tallies of the war. During July 1944, after the initial success of D-Day, Poole and his crew were thrust into an ongoing campaign that would test their resolve and combat skills. In just 81 days, between July 25 and October 14th, Poole and his crew destroyed an astonishing 258 German tanks, marking one of the most successful tank-killing streaks by a single tank commander in WWII history. Despite being outnumbered and often facing superior German tanks like the Panzer IV and the formidable Tiger Warnschirm, Poole and his crew's Sherman tanks proved to be remarkably effective. What made Poole's success even more extraordinary was his strategic brilliance, which went beyond the firepower of his vehicle. He would often use the terrain and tactical surprise to his advantage, catching German tanks in vulnerable positions and destroying them. One of Poole's most famous engagements occurred during the Battle of Avranches, where he and his crew knocked out 30 German tanks over just 2 days, despite being heavily outnumbered. His actions were a major morale boost to the Allies and dealt a significant blow to German armor in the region. As his success mounted, so did the risks. On August 24, 1944, during a heavy engagement, Poole's tank was struck by enemy fire. The blast caused severe injuries to Poole, including burns and shrapnel wounds. But even though he was wounded, Poole refused to be evacuated. His dedication to his crew and his mission was evident as he insisted on staying in action, even after his tank was badly damaged. Poole's persistence in the face of injury is a testament to his character. He was eventually forced to take a break from active combat due to his injuries. But his return to the battlefield was nothing short of legendary. His return would see his crew continue their campaign, destroying even more German tanks and solidifying his reputation as one of the greatest tank commanders of the war. For his extraordinary bravery and skill in combat, Lafayette Poole was awarded numerous decorations, including the Distinguished Service Cross, the second highest U.S. military honor, the Silver Star, and the Bronze Star Medal. He also received the Purple Heart for his wounds sustained during the battle. Poole's accomplishments weren't just measured in the number of tanks he destroyed, they were also about the psychological and strategic impact his actions had on the German forces. His success demonstrated that, despite the technological superiority of the enemy, the resolve, ingenuity, and leadership of a small team could turn the tide of battle. Poole's actions exemplified the power of small unit tactics and the effectiveness of tank warfare when led by a visionary leader. Lafayette Poole's story remains an inspiring one. His actions were a testament to the idea that determination, ingenuity, and leadership can overcome seemingly insurmountable obstacles. While many of the battles he fought in are not as well known as others, Poole's role in the destruction of 258 German tanks remains a significant part of the history of armored warfare. Today, Lafayette Poole is remembered as one of the unsung heroes of WWII, his bravery and achievements standing as a symbol of what can be accomplished against all odds. His story is a reminder of the power of individual determination in the face of overwhelming force, and it continues to inspire military personnel, historians, and ordinary people alike. It was a clear, humid morning on July 25, 1944. Lafayette Poole, now fully recovered from his previous injuries, gripped the throttle of his Sherman M4A3 tank. The roar of the engine vibrated through his fingertips as he maneuvered the tank into position. His crew, a cohesive team of men from different backgrounds but united by a singular purpose, prepared for their first major engagement. They had no illusions about the challenge ahead. 258 German tanks, heavily fortified positions, and overwhelming numbers. But Poole had a secret weapon: tactical ingenuity. The Germans had been entrenched in northern France for years, their forces fortified and battle-hardened. The Panzer IV, Tiger the Fernfrey, and Panther tanks were the backbone of their armored division, and they were more than a match for the Allied forces. These tanks had superior armor, better weaponry, and were built for destruction. However, the one thing they lacked was mobility in the rough terrain of the French countryside, especially in narrow roads and heavily wooded areas where the Allied forces had the upper hand. Glenn and his crew knew that to face the German armored giants, they had to use their environment to their advantage. They were familiar with the land, its rolling hills, dense hedgerows, and muddy paths. Poole quickly realized that although the Germans' tanks were stronger, their tactics were predictable. The Germans tended to rely on heavy frontal assaults with overwhelming force, assuming their tanks could charge through any resistance. But Poole understood that if he could outmaneuver them, use hit-and-run tactics, and force them into the confines of difficult terrain, the tables could be turned. As the days went by, Poole's strategy started to unfold. Instead of a direct confrontation, which was sure to be disastrous, he used his Sherman tank's mobility and smaller size to strike quickly. Poole would position his tank in ambush spots, often hidden by the dense brush or in the shadows of the hedgerows, waiting for the German tanks to advance blindly into the trap. He would hit them where they were weakest, on the sides or at the rear, and then retreat quickly before the Germans could respond. At times, the German forces would retaliate with ferocity, sending multiple tanks after Poole and his crew. But with every battle, the small crew grew more confident and more skilled in executing their plan. They would engage 1 or 2 German tanks at a time, avoid full-scale confrontations, and then disappear into the landscape. Each victory built momentum. Poole's reputation began to spread, and the Germans started to understand that he wasn't just another tank commander. He was a force to be reckoned with. The idea that a group of men, armed with a single tank, could take on an army and win seems almost fantastical. Yet the reality of war is often not about the size of the forces, but the wisdom of the commander and the determination of the soldiers. Poole's success wasn't due to brute strength or overwhelming firepower. It was his ability to exploit the weaknesses of his enemy and to turn seemingly insignificant advantages into critical victories. By August 3, 1944, Lafayette Poole and his crew had destroyed over 30 German tanks. The number was staggering, especially when compared to the number of losses they had sustained. Only 2 tanks lost in the same period. Poole's crew, operating in perfect harmony, had created an almost mythical aura around their tank. Allied forces had begun to take notice, and rumors of the tank-killing Texan spread across the battlefield. In one of the most audacious encounters, Poole found himself engaged with 5 German tanks at once, a confrontation that would either end in certain death or an improbable victory. With the terrain heavily in his favor, Poole carefully calculated his moves. He disabled one tank with a direct hit to its turret before retreating into a narrow passage. As the Germans pursued, Poole used the dense hedgerows to his advantage, outflanking the Germans and destroying 2 more tanks before disappearing into the landscape once again. By the end of August, Poole and his crew had annihilated over 100 German tanks. The battle was far from over, but the scale of their success was beginning to seem like a dream. As the weeks went by, the 81-day campaign became more than just a series of battles. It became a testament to the endurance of the human spirit. Poole's hands were calloused from the constant use of his tank's controls. His men, exhausted but driven, began to speak of their victories not in terms of numbers, but in terms of their shared purpose. The war was far from over, but they had become a symbol of hope for the Allies. The Germans were starting to feel the pressure. As the death toll mounted and their tank numbers dwindled, they began shifting strategies to combat the growing threat of Poole's team. But it was too late. The German forces couldn't adapt quickly enough to the new tactics. Poole's crew was already executing ambushes with such precision that it was as if they were fighting ghosts. Each victory for the Allies was also a psychological blow to the German forces. Poole's fame spread not only among his comrades, but also among the enemy. The Germans came to fear his tank and the Texas crew. Reports began to come in from the front lines. The American tank commander, he moves like a shadow, striking only when it's impossible to retaliate. By September 1944, the enemy had begun to take drastic measures. A German panzer division, comprising some of the most elite tank units in the Wehrmacht, was dispatched to eliminate Poole and his crew. It was clear that the Germans were no longer underestimating him. Poole, however, was unshaken. His calm demeanor and unflinching resolve became legendary, even among his own men. He knew that the success of his crew depended not only on their ability to destroy tanks, but also on their ability to adapt and outlast the relentless pressure the Germans were applying. Poole's strategy had evolved from basic ambushes to deceptive maneuvers and even decoy tactics. At times, his crew would set up a false tank position or use artillery fire to trick the Germans into thinking they were engaged in a larger battle. These tactics, combined with their ability to blend seamlessly into the environment, made them nearly impossible to track. However, the Germans were relentless. As they began sending more powerful and experienced forces into the area, Poole and his men faced battles that were no longer about numbers or positioning. They were about survival. The terrain had become more difficult, and the stakes higher than ever. But Poole, with his characteristic ingenuity, refused to back down. He adapted to the changing nature of the conflict, taking risks that many other commanders would have avoided. With each battle, his tank took more damage, but Poole's crew fought on, always adjusting, always one step ahead. During this period, September 10–14, 1944, Poole and his crew destroyed an additional 80 German tanks. The Panther tanks, which had proven difficult to destroy earlier, became a new focus. These German tanks were built with advanced technology and were a significant threat, but Poole, never one to shy away from a challenge, took the fight directly to them. In one battle, Poole's tank found itself facing down a German armored column consisting of 20 Panther tanks. The odds were heavily stacked against him, but Poole saw an opportunity in the shadows of the woods. Instead of charging in head first, as the Germans expected, Poole chose to engage in a drawn-out battle of attrition. He picked off one tank at a time, using the terrain and his tank's mobility to stay elusive. As the battle raged on, Poole's tactic of isolating the tanks and picking them off one by one proved successful. By the time the dust settled, 11 German tanks had been destroyed, with Poole losing none of his own. His reputation as an unmatched tank commander was now firmly cemented. Poole's ability to take on an overwhelming force with such precision and skill speaks to a deeper truth about leadership and determination. In times of crisis, it's not always about having the most resources, but about making the most of what you have. Poole's relentless pursuit of success, coupled with his strategic thinking and adaptability, turned what seemed like an impossible task into a devastating reality for the German forces. The climax came on October 14, 1944, after nearly 81 days of non-stop combat. Poole and his crew had already destroyed more than 250 German tanks, but the war was far from over. The Germans, growing desperate, launched one final push to rid the region of Poole's tank unit. This time the odds were truly insurmountable. Poole and his men, though tired and battered, knew that their survival depended on one final push. The last battle was a chaotic blur of movement and fire, with tanks exchanging heavy fire across the battlefield. But once again, Poole's tactical genius prevailed. In the final hours, Poole managed to outflank a German armored battalion, positioning his tank in a place where the Germans never saw him coming. As the German tanks advanced, Poole and his crew fired with deadly accuracy. The result was devastating. 18 more German tanks were destroyed in the final engagement, bringing their total to 258. As the smoke of battle cleared on the French fields, Poole's tank sat motionless, its engine silent. The crew had done the unthinkable. They had survived. But what lay ahead for them was far from ordinary. Poole, despite being hailed as a hero by his men and fellow soldiers, remained humble. His tank, damaged yet still standing, was a testament to not only his bravery, but to the remarkable teamwork of his crew. The battle was over, but the war was not. Poole and his crew had survived 81 days of grueling combat, an astonishing feat considering the odds they had faced. They had destroyed 258 German tanks, a number that dwarfed the achievements of most armored divisions. But Poole's victory wasn't just measured in numbers. It was about the psychological impact of his actions. His success had sent shockwaves through the German forces, demoralizing them and throwing off their well-laid plans for retaliation. The Allies, meanwhile, recognized Poole's leadership and bravery. His actions in those 81 days were a significant turning point in the war, showing that despite the technological superiority of the Germans, the spirit of determination and ingenuity could overcome even the most overwhelming of odds. Poole's name was soon known throughout the military and among the press as one of the most successful tank commanders in history. After the battle, Lafayette Poole's contribution to the war effort was recognized with numerous awards, including the Distinguished Service Cross and the Silver Star. But it was the respect of his peers and the German forces that spoke the loudest. His ability to destroy so many tanks in such a short amount of time, while outnumbered and often outgunned, became a story passed down through generations of soldiers. Poole had proven that creativity, perseverance, and strategic thinking were just as important as sheer firepower in modern warfare. Lafayette Poole's legacy transcends the battlefield. He proved that the most unlikely heroes can make the greatest impact. A man with no formal military training, just a deep sense of duty and an unyielding spirit, was able to take on the most advanced war machines of the time and come out victorious. His story is a reminder that courage, resourcefulness, and leadership are sometimes the most powerful weapons in war. By the time the WWII battle had ended, rumors of Lafayette Poole and his crew had spread far beyond the front lines. To many soldiers, he was no longer just a tank commander. He was a living legend. The myth of the tank killer from Texas became one of the most talked about stories among the Allies, from the highest ranks to the infantrymen on the ground. In one of his quiet moments, as he sat by his damaged tank, Poole reflected on the strange turn his life had taken. He had never asked for fame, nor did he seek glory. He was just a man who did his duty, and in doing so had achieved something that seemed almost impossible. Yet, for all his success, he remained humble, driven not by recognition, but by a fierce sense of responsibility to his crew and his country. The press had already started calling him one of the greatest tank commanders in American history. But it wasn't just the numbers, 258 tanks destroyed, that made Poole's story remarkable. It was the way he fought. He didn't just rely on the power of his Sherman tank. He used strategy, clever tactics, and his knowledge of the land to overcome the Germans' superior firepower. Poole's ability to think on his feet and adapt to the ever-changing dynamics of warfare set him apart from other commanders. His fame wasn't just a product of his achievements on the battlefield. It was a reflection of his unrelenting spirit. Poole's actions became symbolic of the American resilience that defined the war effort. His crew, despite having limited resources and no extensive formal training, were able to achieve the impossible through sheer grit and ingenuity. But Lafayette Poole's myth wasn't limited to Allied forces. The Germans, too, had come to fear him. Reports from German commanders revealed the psychological toll that Poole's unit took on the enemy. The Germans, once confident in their tanks' supremacy, were now having to reassess their strategies. They had encountered a new kind of enemy, one that used the land, quick thinking, and a relentless pursuit of victory to turn the tide. The story of Poole's tank destruction streak was widely discussed within German military circles. Some believed it was simply a stroke of luck, while others saw Poole as a master of guerrilla tactics. No matter the explanation, his reputation had a lasting impact. The Germans, who once believed their tanks were invincible, found themselves forced to rethink their approach to armored warfare. It was a classic case of David versus Goliath, and the outcome was nothing short of historic. In many ways, Poole's legacy is a study in resilience. In a world where technology and overwhelming force often rule the day, Poole's story demonstrates that ingenuity, bravery, and determination can make the difference. His campaign wasn't about overwhelming the enemy with sheer numbers. It was about outsmarting them, using the landscape, and relying on the skill of a few men who believed in their mission. The myth of Lafayette Poole continues to serve as a reminder that the most significant victories are sometimes not the ones that are won by brute force, but by intelligence, strategy, and a will to succeed, no matter the odds. As the war continued to grind on, Lafayette Poole's tank was eventually damaged beyond repair. But Poole, ever resourceful, continued to lead his crew until the final days of their campaign. The war, it seemed, would never give them a break, but Poole's resilience had earned him a final push. One last mission before the war would come to an end. By early November 1944, the 3rd Armored Division had advanced deep into enemy territory. But the Germans were still holding strong. Poole's fame had spread beyond the battlefield, and even in the face of new tank models and stronger German resistance, Poole and his men pressed forward. His injuries, which had slowed him down in the past, had not diminished his resolve. Even after spending weeks in a hospital recovering from wounds, he was determined to rejoin his crew. Poole's return to active duty was nothing short of remarkable. Despite his earlier injuries, which included significant shrapnel wounds from tank blasts, Poole continued to command with his usual precision. But by now, his success had outgrown even his own understanding. He had gone from a relatively unknown tank commander to one of the most celebrated military figures of the war. And it wasn't just about the 258 tanks he had destroyed. It was his spirit, his ability to keep pushing through setbacks, that made him a hero in the eyes of his men and the Allies. But as the Allies began to approach Germany in the final months of the war, the realities of supply shortages and the increasing difficulty of logistics began to take a toll. Poole's unit, though still functional, was no longer the well-oiled machine it once was. Tanks were in short supply, and Poole's crew, which had once been a powerful force of 5, had begun to dwindle in number. As January 1945 arrived, the war was drawing to a close. The Germans, though still formidable, were beginning to retreat in the face of Allied advances. Poole, despite the toll the war had taken on him, continued to lead his men in skirmishes along the Rhine and in the final battles of the Western Front. His legend only grew as word of his tank-killing prowess spread even further. Despite the crushing pressure of the final push and the many battles still ahead, Poole's role in the war was far from over. His skills were still highly valued, and his contributions to the Allied victory were still being acknowledged, though he would never fully bask in the limelight. The war ended in May 1945 with the surrender of Nazi Germany. By that time, Lafayette Poole's crew had destroyed over 300 German tanks, and Poole had earned the respect of the highest military ranks. His service didn't stop with the battlefield. He returned home a hero. Yet, true to his humble nature, Poole didn't crave the accolades or the fame that came with his victory. After the war, Poole returned to Texas, where he was greeted with the kind of admiration and reverence usually reserved for war heroes. He had done something few others had done. He had faced the enemy in its most formidable form and had emerged victorious. Yet, for all the recognition he received, Poole never let the fame get to his head. He returned to his quiet life, not seeking the spotlight, but instead choosing to remain a man of principle, dedicated to his family and community. Though he never sought recognition, Poole's post-war life was marked by several honors. He was inducted into the Texas Military Hall of Fame and awarded the Distinguished Service Cross, one of the highest honors in the U.S. Army. But even with these accolades, Poole remained largely humble, focused on his life after war. Years have passed since Lafayette Poole's final battle, and though he's long since retired from the military, his legacy continues to inspire generations of soldiers, historians, and anyone who understands the true meaning of courage. His Sherman tank, now a relic of the past, sits quietly in a museum in Texas. Its rusted armor, once a symbol of American might, now serves as a reminder of a time when the impossible was made possible by the hands of a few determined men. Lafayette Poole's actions during those 81 days are more than just a remarkable tale of destruction and survival. They are a testament to the power of ingenuity, strategy, and courage when faced with insurmountable odds. Poole's ability to take on an entire armored division with a handful of men and a single tank is the stuff of legends, but it's also a reflection of something deeper, a lesson in perseverance, leadership, and the unyielding spirit of a soldier. He didn't just destroy tanks, he destroyed the myth that size and firepower alone win wars. He proved that the strength of a few, united by purpose, could outmatch the most powerful machines of war. And through his resilience, Lafayette Poole gave hope to those who would follow in his footsteps, showing them that with the right mindset, even the most difficult battles can be won. Lafayette Poole wasn't just a hero on the battlefield. He was a leader who understood that victory isn't always about having the biggest weapon, but about having the heart to keep fighting no matter what. His story is a reminder to all of us that courage is not the absence of fear, but the ability to act in the face of it. His 81-day campaign wasn't just a remarkable military achievement. It was a demonstration of the human will to overcome the impossible. As the tank's engine fades to silence, one can almost hear the rumble of Poole's Sherman once again, charging across the French fields. His legacy, like the tracks of his tank, remains etched in the history of World War II, a story of endurance, ingenuity, and an unwavering belief that victory can belong to the underdog, no matter how overwhelming the odds.